Well, today in the second service, of course, we have our rite of confirmation, our affirmation of baptism, and the heart of that is really affirming of faith, our faith in God alone. And it's an important rite for these young people, I think, today, and I would add to that, it's something that we do and do again and again. It's one of the reasons we're gathered here today, is affirm our faith. And I think one of the reasons that's so important is this world challenges faith. We live in a time where there's many challenges to faith, and that's not new. As you can see from the scriptures back, from what we read today, there were some huge challenges to the faith. Disciples were leaving Jesus because he said some teachings that were pretty tough. He had been talking about how he was the bread of life that came down from heaven, and they basically needed to eat him in. And they're going, okay, Jesus, that's like really weird. And they're walking away. It is a difficult thing, a difficult teaching he taught. The one I want to focus on today, however, comes from that first reading of Paul, who goes to the Athenians, who were pagans largely. He had some philosophical types there as well, and they had their many gods. And Paul was saying, no, you have your little idols, you have your many gods. That's not it. There's only God. God who made it all, who has talked to us, who has revealed himself through Jesus Christ. That's a tough sell in that world of paganism. Well, I think today we in our cultural time probably look back at those stories of the Greeks and their gods and goddesses and maybe too easily dismiss them as kind of silly. I mean, there's some really silly stories these gods got into, fights and weird things that cause things to happen. We can get lost in all those kind of myths that they have about them. But behind these gods and goddesses are really some deep human truths and values. And that we are remiss if we don't understand their power. You know, today in our society, I often talk about a secularization. Ooh, that's a big word. Secularization going on. And really what I see is that secularization going on is we are leaning away from our Judeo-Christian one-God roots and moving back towards many of the beliefs and ideas and philosophical roots of the Greek culture. That's really what secularization is. I think a guy named Chesterton quipped this way. He said, when people stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing. He said they believe in everything. Just everything starts coming to them, and they're over here, and they're over there, and they're over here. And that was really what Greek culture was about, their religion was about. If you think of their gods, and their many gods, and I'm going to use their Roman names because they're more familiar to us, and they're the planets, as we know, Mercury, Venus, Mars, so forth. And so you have these different gods, and you think, well, what's to them? Well, Mercury was the god of business success. Now, there's some power in our society, isn't there? We have whole institutions, schools, Wall Street dedicated to it. In fact, that big bull out in front of Wall Street, you know what I think of his name should be? Mercury. Mercury the bull. Business success, isn't it? What's behind that whole idea? The bull markets, all that good stuff. And what happens is we want business success. We want financial success. I get that. We need some of that. But what changes is when that becomes why we're here. That we're living just for that. Our whole sense is around that. That's when it becomes a god in our lives, isn't it? When that's it. I'm a person of value when I have business success. And we end up bending our knee, basically, and worshiping. Now, there's no Mercury out there. No God, no temple to him. But those values are still here. And the same with, say, Aphrodite, or Venus, as we say, the planet, goddess of love and beauty. As we all know, we can go after that one. How about Athena? We can say, hold it, she's the goddess of wisdom, education. Those are good things. But when that's all there is, and that's what's going to save us, and when we just throw our whole lives at that, hold it, wait a second. What's going on there? We've raised it up. We may not have the idols anymore, the images and the temples. Hercules, God-man of the stadium and athletic success. Whoa. There's temptation. All these things lure us. And when there's not only God, what do? We go after this one, after that one, after this one, and that one. Can go temple to temple. And so I think that power of many of the Greek ideas is still with us. It's shifted, but they're still with us. It's that secular world, in a strange way, I shouldn't call it that, because it's a very religious world, honestly, in the ancient world, that Paul walked into and said he wants to bring the message of the only God. There's only God who created everything, who made the heavens and the earth and all things, who spoke to us through this person called Jesus, who's raised up to be someone you look to and worship alone. Think of the first commandment, right? You shall have no other gods before me. Paul's just starting right there at number 1 with these people. The interesting thing I think he does is he reaches into their own poets and picks out a verse, a line, and uses that to try to get their attention. Say, even you have something that gets at this. And it was used originally for Jupiter or Zeus. It goes, in him we live, move, and have our being. That's the line he pulls out. And he moves that to in God alone, the only God, we live, move, and have our being. It's the only place. Only in God do you live, move, and have our being. And I think that's very instructive for us in terms of this day where we're affirming faith, where we concentrate on affirming our faith. I hope you can find your way to those words yourself today. Let me unpack them a little bit for you. In God alone we live. In the Bible, the word life and live can mean biological stuff, but it often means relational. That to have life in God is to have this relationship in God. John's gospel uses the word life. You can just cross it off and write relationship. They didn't have a word relationship, so they just used this word life, and we still use it that way together. Those two get married, and we say they have a life together. It's a relational word, and that's the way I'm going to take this one. In God, we have this life. And of course, with the invisible God that we can't see, touch, or hear directly from, we go, well, what's that like? We can't know. And so that's one of the things we get revealed through scriptures and Jesus' teaching in particular. What is this life we have with God? How do we know what it's going to be like for us? That's why he tells things like stories, like parables. I think one of the great famous parables, of course, the prodigal son who goes away and squanders all his father's money that he's given him for inheritance too early. And he comes crawling back home, just saying, oh, man, I blew it. I hit the bottom, so I'm going to go back home, see if I can have Dad will do something for me. And Dad runs out, of course, runs out and hugs him and kisses him and puts a ring on his finger and has a party for him. That in this God, this life we have with God, we say the baseline is, of course, grace for us. This God is not out to get us. This God is not out to beat us up, but this God is out there to give us this love. In God alone, we live together. No grace for ourselves. In God alone, we move. And again, I think that really gets back to that idea we talk a lot about here. We're called to move. We're called to live the love that God has given us and bring that out into the world. And God, we move. And part of that moving is responsibilities in our families that God would have us show up, and roles that we have in our families. And part of that may be in a career that we have, it's some kind of opportunity or job we have. And part of that we understand is through the church to the greater world, through God's people, us here. There is something we do into this world that's not going to happen without that call of God moving us. And that's the hope. It moves us inside. To do something for, say, homelessness, which we actively do with our Interfaith Hospitality Network, to do something about children in neglect through our KPC Kids Place, to do something about people who are hungry or thirsty through our World Hunger Program, and getting wells and food out there. That God's moving from within. In God we live, and we move, and we have our being. When I think of my being, I think of all that I am. It's my consciousness, my body, my mind, but finally, the fact that I just am. We're here, alive. We have these beings that we are as people. And I think of that for our youth in particular today. I don't know how your middle school years went, but mine didn't go so well. That pretty typical out there, you know, middle school, you look back and say, oh, that was just this great time. No, I don't think many of us do that. It certainly wasn't for me. I struggled with my being. I didn't like my being. I wasn't very good at sports. I wasn't good at academics. I wasn't good socially. I was kind of an awkward, nerdy youth. I didn't like myself. And I learned something from that, though. Being a bit on the miserable side, I would have to say. And that is, this world and its gods weren't coming through. That there had to be, I hoped there to be, I looked for something beyond what we find here. Because the God of financial success is pretty darn whimsical. Hercules comes and goes. Sorry, folks, it's true. You get him for like 10 years. Goddess of wisdom lasts longer, but she can pull the rug out from you as well. That maybe there's something more than these things, beyond. That in God, we can have a being that's beloved, a being that can live out its world, that knows that it's okay, and find joy and acceptance for our limited and flawed people that we are. In God alone. We don't have idols today. Paul was preaching against the idols. But we know about the draw, every one of us, to bend our knee at financial success or wisdom or whatever other god or goddess we can find. In God alone, we live a life together, knowing God is there with us, gracious to us. In God alone, we move, have this reason to get up in the morning, to go about our work, and to do things that are good in this world. In God alone, we have our being, the fact that we even exist, and can find that it's a wonder and a gift and not just a negative and wish it were different. We have this good being from God. So I'd like you to say that with us. We're here to affirm our faith. We do it through the creed, do it in many other ways. But today, let's try it with these words. So I'm going to say a phrase, you say it after me. In God alone.
In God alone.
We live.
We live.
Move.
Move.
And have our being.
And have our being.
Walk this week in that. Walk in God alone. We live, move, and have our being.